I would see that it would be maybe joint and several liability. You know, you designate someone, the owner's still always responsible, and there may be other people who are responsible as well.
Well, if you think about the managing agency agreement anyway, there's an indemnity running in favor of the managing agent, except if they violate the terms of the agreement or are themselves negligent. So you can see where the appointment of a managing agent has a great deal of issue, but that's between the owner, let's say, or the board, and the managing agent. As against the person who's injured, they're both jointly and severally liable. I wouldn't think that the owner could walk away from it, except if the owner, for example, had nothing whatsoever. If work, for example, is being done inside an apartment, only inside an apartment, and it's a condo, and the condo has limited approval of the work, and there's an alteration agreement assigned, there's a substantial body of case law that says the condo gets out of that lawsuit.
But you know, it's kind of analogous in a way to what we look at when we look at the scaffolding law, Labor Law 240, because owners have absolute liability under the statute, but when you get involved in litigation, the owners say, I had nothing to do with supervision, I hired a general contractor, they were responsible for it, but the owner still can be responsible for it, and certainly will be in that lawsuit.
Yeah, well,
seems like a similar kind of thing.
Again, the laws and the regulations that are drafted are not perfect. What a shock. And the lawyers very often will have an opportunity to argue and interpret, you know, in front of the courts. And a body, what happens is over time, bodies of case law develop. And this is a new one. This is, you know, the law is a trailing indicator. We figure out after it screws up how to fix it or who's responsible. You know, it's something that hasn't been, but there's no strict liability provision in this new law,
right.
like there is in the labor.
I wonder how it would be interpreted, because it seems like an analogous kind of thing.
Yeah, it is, but there's no specific provision. So, you know, it's, again, you can see how lawyers discuss, and this is the kind of back and forth exactly that goes on between lawyers when they're trying to get their client off the hook or trying to keep somebody else on the hook.
Go ahead.
In my experience, I agree with what everybody's saying, that as an owner, you're not going to get out of a lawsuit. You're going to be brought anytime there's a lawsuit, you're going to be named. So the only thing that you can do, practically speaking, is number one, to have good insurance that covers you, and number two, have agreements for indemnification with your manager. This is from the owner's viewpoint, with any tenant or unit owner that's doing work, and also with contractors, so that you'll be able to assert claims against them and also require them to have good insurance that's capable of paying the claims. But you're going to get sued, you're going to stay in the lawsuit. It's going to be very, very, very hard, except in the few instances that Steve mentioned, to get out of the lawsuit. So really the game and the strategy has to be having the right agreements in place before, so that you're able to be indemnified and get payment from other parties.
The other thing would be is to take care of the issue of having somebody available immediately who can act as the impairment coordinator, preferably somebody who's at the building, preferably somebody who has a certificate of fitness and is familiar with what needs to be done. And so, you know, we can indemnify and try and cover ourselves by insurance until the cows come home, but it's much better if the system goes down to have somebody there to make sure that there's a degree of safety involved. I think that probably safety first, you know, let's make sure that we're safe.
And give me a second. I just want to come back to something that actually maybe you raised earlier, because, you know, a lot of people, you asked the question or you made the comment, doesn't insurance cover this kind of stuff? And I just want to make the comment that people kind of have this false sense of safety about insurance, like, we've got insurance, it covers everything. No matter what's going to come up, we report it to the carrier, they take care of it. And we know as lawyers how often insurance companies decline coverage or reserve their rights to defend something. And so you can't assume that everything is covered. And there might be exclusions, they're called, under the policy for gross negligence or something like that. So, you know, and also like your management companies, even though they have insurance, I very much doubt their insurance covers this kind of stuff. So, you know, even if they were thinking, gee, we would take on this responsibility, I'm not sure their insurance would cover it. So you really have to think about that.
One of the things is whenever I'm dealing with these issues about what the insurance covers, I contact the broker or the agent, and I ask them specifically whether it is. Also, I'm very careful to do two things. One, to make sure that my client is named as an additional insured party on the policy, not just, you know, named. When you get these certificates of insurance, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're added as an additional insured party. It means that you'll get notice if the insurance is canceled. So you want to make sure that you or your, you know, principal, if it's a co-op or condo or whoever, is named as an additional insured party. The other thing is that the certificate of insurance itself is not insurance coverage. So I ask for the policy and I look at it, or I get confirmation from the broker that it covers what we need. Because just because an insurance certificate says that there's coverage doesn't mean there is. And I can tell you that I'm dealing with a case right now where unfortunately a man lost his legs, and my client was named as an additional insured. And although they got the insurance certificate, the premium was never paid, the insurance was canceled, and we thought we were covered and we were not. And it's a big case. So you have to, the question about whether it's covered by insurance or not is really, you know, I agree with CJ completely. You have to really know the policy and have somebody who's familiar with them look at it. And I've looked at policies and I'm familiar with these policies, and I have to tell you, they are the toughest things to read because you wind up with a policy and then you wind up with exclusions and you have to read them all together. It's best to have somebody who's familiar with all these things regularly. I, myself, as a lawyer, am perfectly capable to read them, but I always contact the broker and if necessary, the company itself, just to cover myself. And so if I'm doing it, maybe you should be doing that too. The question is whether the owner can name more than one impairment coordinator, for example, somebody who can cover the first hour and then the impairment, the fire safety company comes in. I don't see why not. Do you have any?
No, I mean, it's, since you don't have need a certificate, you can appoint one or more and you can carve up the responsibilities and do whatever you want. It depends on the situation. The city may not know, so the city may do nothing, and the time goes by. And so, I mean, the city would then come in, they would issue a violation. They'd issue a violation, right, but that takes, as I'm sure you've seen, that takes time. It may take a few weeks, it may take a month, I mean, except like if you run out of oil where they do it quicker.
The question was whether if there is no impairment coordinator or fire guard, does the fire department come in and take care of it? And the example that was given is, or if, you know, if there's a repair, the city will come in and make the repair. And you heard Steve.
Yeah, I mean, the exception would be if the fire department actually came in and they saw that this is really a dangerous situation. What they have done is they've ordered an evacuation of the building. I mean, that's something that they may do. They might come in as a matter of safety and just say, get everybody out of here.
What you have to keep in mind is this law is trying to prevent something really horrible from happening. In other words, let's say the standpipe is impaired. Nobody knows that. You're supposed to be having coordinators, people notifying people, but the building is totally remiss in doing that. The awful way that the fire department may find out about it is there's a fire, right? Then it's like heads will roll because everyone's first trying to figure out who should have known, whose name was on there, and go backwards and try to figure all of this out. So you're trying to prevent something really horrific from happening, like the Deutsche Bank incident a number of years ago. That's the thing, you know, who's responsible? So it's not like someone's going to know right away, oh gosh, we better get on top of this.
In addition to the notification process.
Mr. Elkins, you need a microphone? You need a microphone?
No, in addition to the notification process, there's also a system of discs that have to be put on the outside of the building for everyone to see. And it's different color discs that get applied to the signees and also there are labels that you're supposed to put in the lobby, and, you know, it's a little bit more, there's more protocol than just notifying.
Is there any chemical that you should use, just like you use for boilers, to clean that? It's not monthly, yearly?
As part of the notification, no, this is maintenance.
Okay, so that's
That has
not
nothing to
required.
do with,
They're not required to see those things.
no.
We should just say the situation that was described was that there was a 4-family residence that ultimately was changed to a 2-family residence and now has been changed to a single-family residence. And when it was 4 families, there was a sprinkler system required. And now that it's a 1-family, it's no longer required, but it's still there. And the question was, and there's a leak, and you're now getting violations, and what to do. They're saying that it needs to be capped. And I agree that it's maybe you should come up afterwards, but it leads me to a question that we were asked to answer at the last time we spoke on this issue. And it's almost the flip side of yours. Let's say you're in a building that doesn't require a sprinkler, or did not require a sprinkler under the old law. What triggers the requirement today? And so I was assigned the duty to find this out.
Were you assigned
And
in writing?
what's that?
Were you assigned in writing?
I was designated, actually I designated
Verbal
myself.
designation.
Yeah, it was a verbal designation, not good enough for the fire safety code, but good enough to answer the question. I actually got a lot of information, and I'll just share it with you, because I spoke to a number of expediters and architects about this. And I was told that the administration provisions of the building code govern, and they gave me 28-101.4.2, which is located in the general administrative provisions of the building code, outline all of the requirements. The owner of a building constructed before the enactment of the 2008 code has the option of using the 2008, the 1968, or the 1938 code, except A, mechanical code provisions, i.e. elevators, plumbing, electrical, and mechanical, must comply with the 2008 code. B, installation, alteration of fire protection systems, including such changes required by a change in use group, must comply with the 2008 code. Installation of an elevator must comply with the 2008 code. Safety of public and property must comply with the 2008 code. And when construction costs over a 12-month period exceed 50% of the replacement cost of the building, or the main or dominant use of the building is changed, you have to comply with the current law. So after I got all of this from my experts, I said, okay, when do I need to put in a sprinkler? Because all of that was good, but it didn't tell me when I had to do it. So I got 2 answers, and one of them is kind of funny considering who I got it from. It was one of the major expediting companies in the city, and they said that in residential buildings, they don't worry about installing sprinklers or other new fire safety equipment. They simply put down on the application that the sprinklers are not required, and then they go in and negotiate. And so I was like, really? This is how you do it? I said, what are the standards when you negotiate? And they said, well, we deal with whatever they're complaining about, and we look it up and we argue with them. I said, okay. The second person, who's an expediter and an architect and somebody who I happen to use as an expert in my cases fairly regularly, gave me a more precise answer, and here's what he said. He said, similar to above, the mechanical, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC must comply with the new code. He also said when there's a change in the use group, the new code is required on architectural issues. He also explained that there was a financial test, and that when the building was built under the old code, If the cost of alterations were less than 1/3 of the replacement cost of the building, then the 68 or 38 code could be used. If the cost was more than 1/3 of the replacement cost of the building, then the newly renovated areas had to be constructed in accordance with the 2008 code. And when the cost of change was 2/3 of the replacement cost of the building, then the entire building had to comply with the code. So it seems like you change the use in the areas where you're going to have to change the use, that's a requirement for the sprinklers, but also there's a cost test, and it's 1/3 / 2/3. Below 1/3, you can use the old code. Above 1/3, you have to comply with the new code as to the areas that are being constructed, and above 2/3, then you have to make the entire building comply. So I guess that's the rule of thumb. Yep, you want to add to that? By all means.
I am Alex Weiss. I am a professional engineer, and I'm here today to answer some of your questions.
Alex, you want to stand? A little?
Yeah.
Alex, you want to stand? Stand. Yeah, because you're a little.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm here to answer your questions. And specifically, I would like to add to sprinklers. The sprinklers are required starting with one family and up. And this is the code. And why we require sprinklers in one family, and when we require sprinklers in one family house. So the building code in 2004, I think we accepted the international code as the basis for our new code, which is, we call it 2008 code, and the international code requires sprinklers in one family dwellings too. But New York City, it may be in the code, in a 2014 code or later, because we take the provisions from the international code and adapt it to the requirements of the New York City environment. Okay, so right now, if the fire department has also a code, it's fire code. And fire code requires sprinklers anytime you do a substantiate alteration to your building. And most likely, when you apply for a CFO, even one family house, you want to make extension, horizontal or vertical extension, you have to check, because the fire department requires sprinkler when the clear egress, clear road size is, I believe it's when it's less than 39 feet, then you need sprinklers. And what does it mean, 39 feet? If you have a road 60 feet, right, and sidewalk is 15 feet, so deduct 2 sidewalks from 60 is becoming 30 feet. So now this is the fire engine or fire ladder access to a building in case of fire. So now you have only 30 feet. You require a sprinkler system, okay? And it doesn't matter what size of building you have. And this is a fire code requirement. And this is being enforced. If you file with the building department, you will get objection to comply with the fire code. So that's when if your street is 100 feet wide, like we have some streets in Manhattan, so you don't have to worry about it. In New York City, we require sprinklers starting with 4-family house. 4-family house and up requires sprinkler residential if you build a new house. Or I believe that if you make extension, vertical extension, it will also require sprinklers for the entire house. Okay, so just remember, and you always have to consult an engineer when you plan for substantial alteration of your house or building, okay, you always have to consult the engineer, because the engineer must actually provide, takes care of your safety and welfare and health, and that's why the engineer is expected to know the codes.
I presume that the negotiation that the first expediter I was talking to was discussing is whether it's and there's nothing in the law, it just talks about substantial alterations. So I think that's where the informal 1/3, 2/3 test comes from, and that's probably what they argue about. I don't know, it's not what I do.
Terrific. Okay, well, so I'd like to introduce two engineers, Alex Weiss and Richard Toder. Alex, you've met, and Richard is actually the next featured speaker. So Richard, if you want to take a microphone, and while he's getting himself settled in, just want to give you a little background on Richard. Richard is the consultant for Rosenwalk Tank. So if you have Rosenwalk Tank in your building, you're already getting the benefit of his expertise. One of his main clients is Rose Associates. He was the past president of the Plumbing Engineers Association and the past president of the Sanitary Engineers Association, and was Engineer of the Year for AIA 2 years ago. And he was the lead investigator for the initial Legionnaires outbreak, if that's what we would call it. And so Richard is going to talk a little bit about if you wanted to install a sprinkler system in your building, what are the things that you need to have as forethought, some suggestions. So if we could just start with that, I would appreciate it.
I've been around for 50 years, and if you look in the building code, you'll see my name as a contributor. In today's world, it's totally different in design than previous, because not everybody is familiar with the new code. People learn the new code the hard way, and that's why these lawyers here do a good business, I would think, and as a defender. I would say that when you have an existing building, the first thing you got to do is get an engineer that's familiar with existing building. You cannot get an engineer that does new buildings, because they don't have a feeling for the people that are living in the building, because once you start the work, they're not coming back the next day to do the replacement or considerations to the restoration of the walls. In answer to Marge, the thing is that a lot of these existing buildings don't have the right piping material. They're all galvanized because they're old buildings. Condo boards live with that problem because they don't want to spend the money. And it becomes, the longer they wait, the more it's going to cost. Now, we're talking about copper piping versus galvanized. And then there are brass pipes. The brass pipes are the hot water piping, and the cold water is galvanized. People don't understand how you get water, period, out of the sink. All they know is they turn the faucet on and water comes out. Well, you must have an engineer to understand that you have to have adequate water and adequate pressure. So the key to it is that many of these buildings have roof tanks. The people that spend the most money are the people that are in the penthouse. Where is the penthouse? On top of the roof. There never was a penthouse, but they put that in. It just so happens that I got a call from Anderson. I didn't know who he was, the sports, the news commentator. And I was in the car, and he called, and he says, I don't have a sufficient pressure. And all we did was take out the old piping and put in new piping. I said, oh? So I said, well, I have to go there and see. What he did was, yeah, he did everything he said, but he extended up on the roof, and when he extended on the roof, he went higher than the roof tank. So consequently, you can only get the pressure that comes out of the tank, and for every 2.31 feet in vertical height, you can only get 1 pound. Now, to operate sprinklers, you need 15 pounds, and you need 15 pounds. Now, that would make the tank up in the sky, but you can't do those things because that costs a lot of money. It was mentioned that Rosenwatt, if you call Rosenwatt, you get me. And I'm the guy that has been around for a lot of years, so we've been doing plumbing work for all the who's who. The key to this whole thing is to get somebody that's been around long enough, that hasn't retired yet, that knows all these in and outs. Now, when you do an existing building, as we're going back to what I originally was talking about, with regards to piping, you think that the pipe, the brass pipe that's used for hot water, would be strong enough to accommodate the length of time that it's been installed. But it's weak at the joints because when they thread a brass pipe, they take off the metal. Now, after so many years, you can't expect the longevity of the piping system to remain. Galvanized piping used for cold water back when, a lot of these buildings on the west side and east side have been built around 1929. And very high rents, no matter where you go, Fifth Avenue or whatever. In those days, that's what they put in. And in order to repipe a building, that takes a lot of energy. What means is you cannot use the same pipe chase that you presently have that the fixtures are backed up on. And for the simple reason that once you open up the plumbing chase, you in turn have other things to think about. And you have asbestos. And the thing is that what we try to do is when we repipe a building, people don't really like what we've come up with because we come up with a piping network that would be vertical pipes up and down the building, but not in the plumbing chase, but we would put it in the nearest closet closest to the bathroom or the kitchen. Because if you put in those new pipes, it doesn't affect the existing toilets that you must use or the kitchen.
Richard, I'm going to reel you back in a little
Okay.
bit, okay, to get back to the fire sprinkler. So in an existing building, the problems that you might encounter in installing a new fire sprinkler.
Okay, when you install, okay, let's say July 1st, 2019, all these office buildings are going to be required to put in sprinklers. That's where you're going to see they're going to be selling off, and residential buildings will be coming in place of that. But when they do the new residential buildings, those residential buildings will be sprinkled throughout because that's really the code. Especially when a lot of these buildings are called high-rise in today's world. Anything over 75 feet is called high-rise. Now the key to this whole thing is that how are you going to sprinkle an existing building? We can even talk about a residential building because they're talking now about doing egress. They haven't put a rule to it, but there's a possibility that egress lobby areas that lead to stairways may require sprinklers. But how would you do that without creating a major problem? Well, every building that we're talking about has a standpipe system, and what we would do is convert the standpipe system to a combined standpipe and sprinkler system. The only difference is that it's the same pipe. We would put a floor control valve assembly connected to the existing riser, and that would be used to serve the entire actual floor. That is a design such that if you had a fire, you would know where the fire is because that floor control valve assembly has a a water flow alarm, and we also put tamper switches on the valve such that if you shut the valve off, we have an indication that you're not going to get any water on that floor. And many times we go to jobs and we find that buildings burn down because the painter shut the valve down and they did not have tamper switches on it. Now, if you use the standpipe system as a source of supply for the sprinkler system, the only thing you have to be concerned about then is the roof tank capacity, because that relates also to the system. And that could be modified. And of course, if you called Rosenwatt, he'd jump on the job and immediately and possibly come up with a number. And the key to this thing is you got Siamese connections that are part of the standpipe system, and those things would remain, and you would take off the words that say fire standpipe, and you put the words that say combined fire standpipe and sprinkler, and you paint the caps, instead of standpipe, which is red, you must paint it yellow. And I would say that it's coming down the road because fire protection is the means to save lives.
Like the other speakers did say, everything has changed in the city. Many people are not aware of the changes, and they're operating under the old rules or the old standards. After the Deutsche Fire, everyone was pointing fingers at one another at the trial. It came out that the building department and the fire department would, didn't have a handle on things, and that's when the National Fire Code was basically enacted. They accepted it, and that is the rule today. Under the new rule, you're required to have monthly inspections, quarterly testing, and yearly maintenance. Now, I'll explain those to you. The monthly testing is the monthly inspection is basically a visual inspection where somebody goes around the building and looks at the valves and makes sure that the valves are locked in the open position and no one has closed them, and that the system is operating. Quarterly, you cannot do that with a certificate of fitness quarterly. Someone has to actually exercise the system. Water has to move in the system. Somebody has to observe the gauge, and a little bit of water has to be let out. Okay? Who requires that? Both the fire department and the insurance policy requires those. And you need to have documentation. There is a whole protocol to that. You need documentation that shows that these things have been done. And at the end of the year, you need to do maintenance, because water standing inside the pipe basically creates different problems. There's calcium that attaches to the pipe. There is rust that naturally occurs. And this is when basically the system has to be flushed out. Now, if the calcium dislodges in the event of a fire, if nothing has been done to the system, and the calcium dislodges, it clogs the sprinkler heads. So instead of water coming out of the head, nothing comes out. Basically, that's why the maintenance is so important. And you need documentation that somebody did this. Now, in the event of a fire, the first thing that the insurance carrier is going to do is ask you for documentation of who did these things. Unless you're able to produce someone that is licensed, because these both the testing and the maintenance have to be done by a licensed professional. And unless you're able to demonstrate to somebody and you have the records, there are at least 2 cases that I know of where the owners have been denied coverage because they didn't follow the rules. And the attorneys could speak about that more than I can. Because a lot of these things, the insurance company will first deny you, and then I don't know what happens after that. You know. But the city of New York and throughout the world, because a lot of these things, a lot of these rules are made after big accidents. For example, we saw accidents in India where people died, and the National Fire Prevention Organization goes to these countries. They study the fires and they make recommendations how to make the code better so that these things don't happen again. And this is how the rules are made. Something happens, they study it, lessons learned, And those lessons learned make a better code. Now, there is a big push here in the city to basically get everything sprinkled, okay? So like I was saying before, anytime you have sometimes some type of alteration or renovation, that triggers, basically it triggers them to look at it and say, okay, what do we do? I myself have seen buildings that have been renovated and people actually have taken sprinkler heads out, okay? And when the building department or fire department comes in, what they did was, not only did they issue a violation, they actually evacuated the building, you know, or they wanted somebody immediately in the building, they wanted proof that an emergency permit, you know, was filed with the building department, that work was happening right now. And that's the only way that we have been able to basically stop the evacuation, where we went down with a lot of people ready to do the work. But fire safety saves lives, and like to go and say, the life that you're saving might be your own. You know, things like smoke detectors. There was a big push in the residential, and we all went with the battery.
Vinny, so I'm gonna,
All right.
that's a perfect
Wait to end it.
presentation, yes, and thank you, that was excellent, and everyone, thank you. This is, our minds are so expanded here. And this whole thing about what trips off the requirement for a fire sprinkler, which is not even gonna matter anymore because you're gonna have it by 2019, but it's not just a list. It takes the engineer, it takes the architect to look at your building, and it's really like a scissor, paper, hands thing, or rock, where it's like, this covers that, this doesn't cover that, this gets that. So it's your individual building, and the multiple different things that go on. So you could have a few bad things on their list, and a lot of good things. So they might say, okay, well, on a point system, you don't need to have the building evacuated. And as a property manager, that has to be a very frightening thing to hear. And so that's the worst thing that can happen short of a fire. But if you need to have a fire sprinkler installation and one architect says, well, you must have it, or a contractor, keep going. It's not keep going until you get the answer you want, but there are so many ways to figure out this nuance that you might be able to save having to do a fire sprinkler installation. But come 2019, you're going to need it anyway.
One of the things that buildings now have to do, and some of them did, some didn't, is the fact that in today's world, the fire department comes in, they don't know really a lot of engineering like they should know about systems, but they know about colors. All the existing sprinklers, mains, standpipe, risers, control valves, all have to be painted. If the fire department comes in, they don't have to know too much, but they know colors, you're going to get a violation. So that is a crucial thing that every building manager should be concerned about, because, and there's one other thing, and that's backflow preventers. I'm not going to talk about that because I could talk forever. I'll give everybody else a chance.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Thank you. And thank you, Alex Weiss of Weiss Engineering, and C.J. Berger, law offices of C.J. Berger, Steve Wagner, with the law offices of Porzio, Bromberg, and Newman, and Stephen Kirkpatrick with Belkin, Burden, Wenig, and Goldman. And thank you all for joining us today. I just would like to announce we have another exhibitor in the back, Great Eastern Energy, Alan Charles and Lou Cohen. And of course, we have Citywide Fire Sprinkler with Vinnie Bove. And I'm sorry. And we have Epic Security. And we have, Helen's telling me we have kosher food, which we have at every NYARM event. Thank you, Helen. And thank you, Mersada Dams and Frida Dietz and Helen Terplak. And again, I'm Margie Russell. We're back here December 12th for our next monthly meeting. And in January, we are having our honoree gala awards dinner. And if the people from REM Residential, they are our Trailblazing Management Company of the Year. So everyone here from REM, just stand up. Yay, congratulations. Thank you, excellent, yes. The innovation in marketing, branding, and management. Check them out on Facebook. Lots of fun. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
No, I have a thought.